This morning we started talking about this idea of understanding the times, and we looked at 1 Chronicles 12 at verse 32 and was read for us this morning, how the sons of Issachar were those that understood the times and knew what Israel should do. And we kind of drew some parallels with our lives today and talked about some of those redeeming values that we could see in the accounts of some of those men of valor, as it was mentioned in 1 Chronicles 7, that the sons of Issachar were also men of valor and they were brave, and how we should be brave as well and be willing to use the judgment that the Lord bestows upon us with His Word. When we put our minds into the Word of God and we put the Word in our hearts and we study to show ourselves approved, using that diligence that He requires of His people, we can have that good judgment and we can know how we ought to react to the things that we see in the world around us. So, continuing on with this idea and this idea of having that good judgment, let's look at some ways that we can understand the times today. And so, understanding the times today, it still requires wisdom. So if we go to Matthew chapter 10 and turn with me in Matthew, the book of Matthew, chapter 10, and there at verse 16 we'll read. Verse 16 says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles." And obviously, in looking at this, Christ is speaking to those that are with Him day by day, his apostles, if you will. He's speaking to those that are going to have to go through some of those things. But the point that I want to focus on in there is that even in these New Testament times, and it's what he's kind of referring to when they are sent out as sheep in the midst of wolves, he's warning them to be wise, to gain wisdom, to exercise that wisdom, to be harmless as doves, and not causing a big stir. As the Lord's people, we don't want to be the ones that are running to strife and to turmoil and running to it's the word I'm looking for, running into battle for the sake of being in battle, looking for a fight. We don't want to be those types of people. There are those that take that more militant stance when it comes to the things that are going on in this world, and those that run with itchy feet to go run into times of trouble and to protest here and protest there. And while we certainly should be those that speak out against the things that we see that are contrary to the Scriptures, contrary to the way that the Lord would have us to be, we need to be careful that we are wise in the way we do that, so that we can be the most effective. And I think that's what the Lord is trying to instill in his disciples here, and in our reading. And I think that same lesson applies to us as we go through our lives, that we must be wise in the way that we encounter the things today, the times today. Understanding that there are dangers in this world. We oftentimes might think, well, that's not such a big deal. We see something happening and perhaps as we turn on the television news, or perhaps it comes closer to home and maybe an issue of the day hits our family or friends or somebody that we know, and we maybe take a step back and say, well, that's not really that big of a deal. And you start to see, as I would say, where there's smoke, there's fire. I often say that a lot, and sometimes you'll see a situation where perhaps, to go back to the analogy of parenting, if you see something in your children, if you see a tendency in your children, that probably is just the smoke, and the fire is smoldering down there, waiting to turn into whatever comes out of what you see in their path. And as we go through life, we need to understand that there are dangers in the world too. Part of that diligence, part of that wisdom that Solomon asked for, was to be able to know what to do in scary situations, in situations that have eternal consequence. And so as we look around us, realizing all the dangers that are around us in the world, we need to use wisdom in understanding that, our children and the whole world around us they're just enveloped in these ideas that are pushed about. And we can say, well, I'm separating them out insofar as, I've got them in church services and I've got them in Sunday school lessons and I share the truth with them and we read the Bible together as a family. We talk about these things and you think that, well, everything's going to be okay, but we need to be careful and understanding that there are those dangers out there and we need to be wise. It's also said in the scriptures that, that Satan lurks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And that's where our wisdom from the Lord comes in understanding how we can fend off or prepare ourselves so that Satan might be fended off. Understanding that the battle is the Lord's and not ours. Understanding the times today still requires an ever-increasing knowledge, something that we have to spend time with each and every day. If we go and move over to the book of Colossians, go to the book of Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1 at verse 9 beginning says, "For this reason we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will, in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing him, being fruitful in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all might according to his glorious power, for all patience and long-suffering with joy, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light." Strengthened with all might, increasing in knowledge. That kind of harkens back to what we talked about yet this morning. Having that knowledge increase, but not only that, but having the guts to go ahead and stand up for those things that we know are right. It still requires that ever-increasing knowledge to understand the times today. It's not enough for us to learn what we need to come to the waters of baptism, get ourselves wet in the waters of baptism and walk up out of those waters never to read and study again, thinking that, well, I now know enough. That's, of course, not enough. We have to continue to increase ourselves, the knowledge that is within ourselves. Hearkening back to Hosea 4 verse 6. Remember what that says? My people, go ahead and shout it out. My people are lost for a lack of knowledge. The idea that knowledge is something that the Christian needs, I think, is sometimes lost. It seems to be lost on the religious world today. How many people do you know that consider themselves religious, maybe even consider themselves to be Christians, that have no working knowledge whatsoever of the Scriptures? When you ask them about the reason that they do the things that they do religiously, they say, well, I don't know, I have to ask the priest or the preacher. I'm not sure. We just do it. We've just always done it that way. We have to know what we're doing, and we have to know why we're doing it, and we have to know by what authority we do these things. We mention it often in our times of worship, in all of the different acts of worship that we participate in on the first day of the week. We mention the authority by which we do these things, and that is by the authority of Christ. There is no other authority that we can do anything by. And when we call upon that name for the authority, we had better make sure that we're in alignment with what he's said. So again, to drive that point home, if we're going to understand the times today, if we're going to know what to change, to bring it around to us today, if we're going to know what the church must do in order to understand the times today and to move forward and be successful followers of Christ, then we have to have that knowledge, and it has to be increasing. These things are still true today. Solomon understood this importance, and this morning, when we talked about him and his desire to get wisdom, that's what he was after. He was after this knowledge of what should I do. And think of all of the accounts of the decisions that he made using that wisdom and how it served him well during the days of his life. These things, while again, I'm not comfortable with saying that we can ever get to that level of Solomon's wisdom, because we know that it says that God blessed him more than he would ever do again or before. And so, but regardless, we do know that we can be thoroughly equipped because we have everything that we need in the Scriptures. Understanding the times today, we still have to remember that we have to ask God. We have to understand that we need Him. We need Christ. It's not enough that we just know the things that we know and that we live a good life, but we have to continually go back to God. And we had a lesson last week on prayer and the importance of prayer. And one of the things that we said in that lesson was that, the prayer is more, it seems to be that the prayer is more for us than it is for God. God knows our hearts, and He knows the things that we're going to ask before we ask them. He knows the deepest desires of our hearts. There's no hiding from Him. So the act of prayer is something for us to come to that, to help it to sink into our own minds that we can't do this alone, that we need the Lord. And it's our way to communicate with Him and to really drive into our psyche, if you will, that we need the Lord, that we lean upon Him, that we trust in Him. And that is something that is still required of Christians today, of the Lord's people today. So let's go over to James chapter 1 at verse 5. And it says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." but let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. And that's a especially stinging comment there when we think about the double-mindedness of mankind and how we can be double-minded very easily. When we ask the Lord to help us through a situation, do we ask in faith? Do we ask for the wisdom to deal with a situation? Do we put forth the effort and understand the importance of the Lord in that process? Do we really believe it's going to happen? That is something that we have to wrap our minds around, asking in faith, not wavering. Because the last part of that statement, really, it speaks to the depth of our hearts. If we ask the Lord for things and we allow ourselves to go to that place where we're doubtful, that yeah, I know that my hope is in heaven after this life, and I know that I don't have anything to worry about, but oh no, if this thing happens to me, what am I going to do? How is that going to be a good thing? What will I do? What will my children do if I am taken out by this, that, or the other thing? Or all of the worries that hit our hearts when there's something lurking on the horizon and we can see it and we're asking for the Lord's help and comfort in that thing. If we allow ourselves to be doubtful, then that says a lot about all of our ways. That idea of being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Just let that sink in. If we ask God, but we don't believe that he is able, and we don't allow ourselves to be convinced thoroughly by the Scriptures, then double-mindedness, that's not a good thing. That's not something unstable in all his ways. That's not something that you want to be said about you. But in understanding the times today, we have to lean on the Lord, just like Solomon did. When you think about that and think about what Solomon did and how he asked the Lord for wisdom, match that up with verse 5 there in James chapter 1. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. That's exactly what he did. That brings that concept from this morning all the way forward to this day and time and this dispensation of time. The same thing is true. We still need the Lord, and when we ask him, he will give, just the same as in the time of Solomon. Now, maybe not by direct operation and inspiration of God, but he's given us, in these times, we have the Word. And if we pray and we trust the knowledge that he has laid out for us in the Scriptures, the ability to use that properly and to decide every day what we'll do, that will come to us. And that is something that we must be sure of in our own hearts. That we, when we read about having the ability to give an answer to those that ask of the hope that is in us with meekness and fear. We have to have this thing settled in our hearts. The faith that we claim to have. The faith that we claim to have that causes us to show up on a Sunday morning, that causes us to open our Bibles, to share the gospel with those around us. We have to have these things fully and firmly settled in our hearts and understand what we are doing. In Matthew chapter 7, starting at verse 7, we'll read there for just a moment. It says, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Therein lies the simple truth of what we have to do. We have to put forth some diligence. It's a superficial example, but just a few weeks ago, I think I might have even mentioned this before, that in going to pick my son Jonathan up from a camp out in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, there was a time where I wasn't sure we were going to make it. And it was by no divine intervention, by no means am I saying that, but just by persistence, we found him. We found the way. We found the road that was going to lead us to where we needed to be. And with the help of the Lord, we also, on our spiritual journey, if we just are persistent and we ask and we seek and we knock, we'll find what we're looking for. He will be sure of that. If we put our noses into the scriptures, and if we put the word into our hearts, and we put forth that diligence that he's asked for, then there's no reason why any of us should be wavering and be tossed around by the times of today. When we look around us, understanding the times today, we can know what to do, just as the sons of Issachar, as we started out the lesson. We can know what to do, and we can be bold enough to follow through with it, and all of that comes from the Lord, not by our own might. So as we wrap this lesson up, hopefully it was the entirety of this line of thinking from this morning and this evening. Hopefully it's been helpful to you, and hopefully we can take these things home and study and think about them for the rest of this week, and think about how we can bolster up our own faith, and how we can look around us today and understand these times of confusion that we live in, how we can understand what steps we need to take. It's clearly outlined in the scriptures what the man of God must do. And we need to be those that step by step put our footsteps in those places that have been laid out for us in the scriptures, disregarding all of the things that would pull us astray off the path, if you will. There's a final thought. There's a danger in not seeking to understand these things. Let's turn over to the book of Ephesians. You go over to the book of Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, starting at verse 14. That we should no longer be children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men in the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. But speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. Now those are the things that we see around us in the world. We see those that have their hearts darkened, and I want to call out this warning that is clearly written here in Ephesians, that if we don't seek, if we don't look to the Lord, if we don't seek out this knowledge, then the end of that is walking in the futility of our minds. It was happening to the Gentiles back then, having their understanding darkened because they wouldn't see, being past feeling because they didn't want to. because they wanted to do what they wanted to do. And that is something that we see, it's all over the place in the world today. Understanding the times today, we see a lot of people who want to do what they want to do, and they don't want to be told what to do, period, end whatsoever. And that's the danger. We don't want to allow ourselves to become that type of people. We want to seek to understand the times. We want that wisdom, the same desire that Solomon had. We want to seek that out in the scriptures every day of our lives. If you're sitting here today, and again, as I look around, it appears to me that everybody here has been baptized into Christ. If you happen to catch this lesson on a recording later and you'd like to study more and understand what it means to be baptized into Christ, we would love to study with you. Please reach out to us. If there's anybody here that needs that same immersion in the waters of baptism, it needs to be obedient to the gospel of Christ, then by all means let that be known. Otherwise, if there are those among us that just need a prayer, that just need a support from the brethren here and now for whatever the need may be in this life, please let that be known. That's one of the reasons that we're here today, that we might be able to build each other up and edify one another, that we can stand strong, understand these times today, and know what to do. So if there's a need on your heart this evening, please let it be known as we stand and sing.